Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to be discussing a couple of articles from the World Economic Forum regarding cybersecurity. And now I'd be a bit suspicious about this lot, especially with their involvement or not with COVID-19, but anyway, that is all a bit tin hat for this channel. And I'm not a medical expert, but what I am is a cybersecurity expert. And the information they cite just paints a really bad picture compared to reality. So there's one recently on the 16th of November 2020, feature series, Cybersecurity, Emerging Technology and Systemic Risk. Just try and paint such a bleak picture of the cybersecurity industry and how more money and more people are needed in it. And, you know, this has always been a problem in the industry for, well, I mean, I've been working in it for over 10 years now, and it's been like that the whole time. Skills gap. There still is a skills gap, although I think it's starting to improve with universities doing courses on cybersecurity. Those new graduates are entering the industry, and I think the skills gap does have the potential to close. You also have better automation coming in from cybersecurity products, so that actually does reduce the need for the number of staff. And that is kind of the approach that we're taking in the company I work at, is relying more and more upon automation. So they're not employing new staff yet, but they are employing new technologies. Oh, they cite some other problems here, and I just really don't quite understand what they're on about. Talk about fragmented approaches. Yeah, but there's always been kind of a fragmented approach through countries in the world. Like, each country has like its own intelligence agency dealing with cybersecurity, and cybersecurity with civilian and military. You know, I don't know what they're quite saying is a problem, but because that approach has always been how it is, and yeah, new approaches needed. Underinvestment, yeah, actually underinvestment has been a problem, but yeah, the difficulty is with cybersecurity, it's not bringing money into a business, but what we do is prevent the loss of money, prevent incidents from happening, prevent data from being leaked, prevent loss of face to a business. And that is where the value of cybersecurity comes. But for a small mom and pop business, they're not going to employ anyone for cybersecurity. But larger companies, then yes, that is more of a need. And that last paragraph, I don't really understand what they're on about, but ambiguous accountability, I don't know, not even going to read it. So what else they mention here? Quantum computing. Sufficiently powerful and error-corrected quantum computer would solve some of the classical mathematical problems on which cryptographic methods rely. If used maliciously, however, it would break the cryptographic underpinnings of the world digital infrastructure on which the digital economy relies. Yeah, so quantum computers are sold to us as being very fast, powerful, and way beyond anything we have nowadays. So yes, encryption would definitely become a problem if they were used maliciously, but the difficulties are running quantum computers. Then you can't just go to a store and buy a quantum computer. I think only a few actually exist in the world, and they are very expensive and difficult to run. A digital identity. A digital identity? I mean, who wants digital identity? I don't want to be identified on the internet. I want to be more anonymous. And the way I see this is that I don't want information about me being stored in too many places, because information inevitably gets lost. There have been too many data breaches throughout recent time, or over the years in fact, to show that there is a little guarantee that information stored on the internet is actually secure. I would just say it's quite insecure, and I wouldn't want personal information about me on the internet. So anyway, I didn't want to cover too much of this article. There is another one I wanted to go and look at, which is a slightly older article from them. So this was in June 2020. What COVID-19 pandemic teaches us about cybersecurity and how to prepare for the inevitable global cyber attack. The inevitable global cyber attack. Surely the only things that are inevitable are the things that you control. COVID-19 shows the world is at great risk of disruption by pandemics, cyber attacks, or environmental tipping points. We should prepare for a COVID-like global cyber pandemic that will spread faster and further than a biological virus, with an equal or greater economic impact. So if the virus didn't get you, the inevitable global cyber attack will. Or should I say, destroy the businesses, because small businesses are definitely having a problem these days. So lesson 1, a cyber attack with characteristics similar to the coronavirus would spread faster and further than any biological virus. The reproductive rate, or R0, of COVID-19 is somewhere between 2 and 3 without any social distancing. So I'm not going to discuss the medical side, but anyway, we just need to mention. So each infected person passes the virus to a couple of other people. So your R0 is how many people you're going to infect. By contrast, the R0 of cyber attacks are 27 and above. Actually, I'm calling it R0, but I think that's how they talk about it there, but otherwise you hear it in the news as the R rate. So one of the fastest worms in history, the 2003 Slammer or Sapphire worm, doubled in size approximately every 8.5 seconds, spreading to over 75,000 infected devices in 10 minutes and 10.8 million devices in 24 hours. That sounds incredibly scary. Let's take a little look in history and read a bit about it though. So SQL Slammer 2003 is a worm that caused denial of service on some internet hosts and dramatically slowed general internet traffic. It spread rapidly, infecting most of its 75,000 victims within 10 minutes. So yes, we are correct so far, but what do we say here? This was a SQL worm. A SQL worm, in other words, SQL servers, internet servers, and not just all SQL servers, but Microsoft SQL Server. So the average home user are not vulnerable to the worm unless they have the Microsoft SQL database engine installed. So already we're citing something that spread rapidly on the internet, but the average home user would not be affected. So that is a really poor choice of source already. So yes, it was a worm. It didn't even do damage. I'm not sure it did because the code was so small. It just replicated itself and spread. Or then what do we have? The 2017 WannaCry attack exploited a vulnerability in older Windows systems to cripple more than 200,000 computers in 150 countries. It was halted by emergency patches and the accidental discovery of a kill switch. The accidental discovery, yeah, the person who was very credited with that wasn't actually the first to discover it. He was the first, however, to make it public. Antivirus companies were already discovered that before he did. Not sure how widely publicized that was though, but I'm not entirely sure the purpose of this kill switch is really. I guess maybe it was for testing, but it was really bad for the malware writer to actually leave it in because, and just to do one as well, it served no purpose. And it just kind of all blew out in the press going, oh, we need to find a kill switch for this piece of malware. There's no such thing. Like, good malware doesn't have a kill switch. A vulnerability in Microsoft Windows was discovered by the National Security Agency, the NSA, and rather than telling Microsoft about it, they decided to weaponize the exploit. But what happens? They lost control of their exploit and it was effectively stolen, and then used in quite a few variances of malware. But Microsoft were quick to patch this. I think they released an out-of-band patch within 4 days. So here's a lesson to learn. The noisier and quicker to spread a piece of malware is, the quicker it will get fixed. And like in the open source world, we're not just limited to monthly updates. Patches are released when they're ready. But even with Microsoft, they do out-of-band patches for something that is extremely critical, and for WannaCry they did. But otherwise, yeah, it's the monthly patch cycle. The cyber equivalent of COVID-19 would be a self-propagating attack using one or more zero-day exploits, techniques for which patches and specific antivirus software signatures are not yet available. Most likely it would attack all devices running a single common operating system or application. So then you're referring to, say, something very popular, Windows, or Android, or iOS. Or I can be very smug sat here on a not so well used operating system called Linux. But I suppose it could be attacks against Linux, like, I don't know, if you went after routers, routers running Linux, but there's not so much to latch onto with routers. So I know they pass data through them, but actual point to latch hold of them and get some malware into them, it's not so easy. Just because something's on the internet doesn't mean you can just exploit it immediately. There has to be some sort of toehold you can gain on the system in order to get something into it to make it do something. So it sounds very vague what I'm trying to explain, but it is. You can't just simply point malware at a device and expect it to do something. No, it has to be a bit of an interaction here and a way for the malware to work. Anyway, since zero-day exploits are rarely discovered right away, Stuxnet used 4 separate zero-day exploits and hid in systems for 18 months before attacking. Oh, we're using Stuxnet, are we? Right. Let me tell you about Stuxnet. Stuxnet was used against Iranian nuclear power plants. It specifically attacked the SCADA switching devices. But it would spread to many different computers because whoever developed the exploit knew it needed to cross an air-gapped network. So, how do you cross an air-gapped network? Well, you have to easily spread through some way. I think it spread via USB to start with, but they had to get it across computers and would have to infect many computers. But most computers weren't the target, and if you were the average computer user and you're infected by Stuxnet, it would do absolutely nothing to your computer. Hence why no one knew about it. It's only when you put it on a system that was controlling SCADA switching devices, specifically the centrifugal devices in the nuclear power plants, would it actually do something. And even then, the effect of it wasn't particularly great. It just slightly adjusted parameters on the SCADA switching, and that slight adjustment could cause damage to the device the SCADA system was controlling. So, are you surprised it went undiscovered for so long? See, what I was saying earlier, a noisy piece of malware that does a lot will get discovered and patched very quickly, but a quiet piece of malware which does next to nothing won't get discovered very quickly at all, and it could go on, as we've seen, for months or even years before it's discovered. So all sources you've cited so far in this article, World Economic Forum, are completely false and provide a completely distorted view to the average user who literally wouldn't have been affected by anything here. Maybe WannaCry, but even then, most things here you wouldn't have been affected with. Actually, WannaCry, you had to leave the remote desktop protocol, the RDP port, open on your firewall, which most people wouldn't do. And even if you did, it was a very stupid decision to do it. So if a vector were a popular social networking application with, say, 2 billion users, a virus with a reproductive rate of 20 may take 5 days to infect over 1 billion devices. But how would you make your malware work over a social network? What, are you going to put it in pictures, videos? It's actually a very low chance of being infected from a picture or video. I know there have been vulnerabilities with graphics in Windows before, actually a couple of times in fact. Yeah, I'd say realistically it's kind of low chances. And anyway, if you're going to infect that many people that quickly, you're going to get discovered. And patches will be made against the software being exploited. And what, you've got to infect like different systems as well. Like, what the average viewer of a social network? They're on mobile phones, aren't they? Maybe Windows as well. So yeah, it's just low chances. You can say about all this grand impact, but realistically, low chances of pulling all this off. So lesson 2, the economic impact of a widespread digital shutdown would be of same magnitude or greater than we're currently seeing. So I'm kind of dubious at the angle they're going at here. But anyway, if the cyber COVID mirrored the pathology of the novel coronavirus, 30% of infected systems would be asymptomatic and spread the virus. Asymptomatic? What is asymptomatic in terms of computers? Right, the computer either does something or it doesn't. And if it does something that you're not expecting, then it's infected. I suppose I should say it does something the original operating system manufacturer doesn't expect, then it's going to be infected. I say it like that because how many executables you got in your system, how many programs have you got in your system, do you know what all of them do? Do you know what one of them does? That's why I'm kind of wording it like that, of unexpected things, because you've got likes of tracking. You wouldn't necessarily expect that in certain operating systems, and it may well be there. Doesn't mean it's infected, just means it's something you didn't expect, but the operating system manufacturer did expect. Anyway, asymptomatic. So I think one way you could say, I'm not even going to call this asymptomatic, but you could have malware transiting a system that can't be affected. So let's say you've got a Windows system sending out malicious emails, and the only things that can be affected are other Windows systems. Well, if that email happened to transit through a Linux mail server, the Linux mail server is not going to be affected, but then that email transiting onto the end device, another Windows device, would be affected. So, but I wouldn't call that asymptomatic. That Linux server, that Linux email server, is not asymptomatic. It merely has malware passing through it. So yeah, I don't even know what you're on about. And why to say nearly a third of them would be asymptomatic and spread a virus? Like, if you're spreading viruses, you're infected. Or it's no longer under your control, which is pretty much infected, as far as I'm concerned. So while half would continue to function with performance severely degraded, the digital equivalent would be in bed for a week. Meanwhile, 15% would be wiped, with total data loss requiring a complete system reinstall. Yeah, that's fine, that can happen. And finally, 5% would be bricked, rendering the device itself inoperable. How do you brick a device from software to hardware? I mean, software physically damaging hardware. How do you do it? Like, okay, I can think of a couple of ways. You run the CPU so much that it overheats and the failsafe in the CPU would just turn off. But then the CPU would cool down and then you just turn it back on and carry on again. Yeah, there's physical failsafes in CPUs these days. We're not sort of going back, 15, 20 years or so. I'm trying to think, maybe the early AMD 64s, in which case actually maybe even more than 20 years, that didn't have that physical failsafe in them and would actually overheat and melt. Yeah, anything now is not going to be affected. What else could you do? Anything with RAM? No. Hard drives? Hard drives. Hard drives, you could potentially brick a hard drive. You could write so much data to it that it would damage the drive. Okay, we've got rotational spinning Rust drives, and you've got more modern solid state disk drives. Solid state disks actually do have the potential to wear out. Now, I've decided to go for a couple of comparisons here. We've got an older article from, I think this was 2013, the Samsung 840 Pro. So they wrote 92,623 gigabytes, and there was some damage to a drive, but the estimated total endurance of that drive was 272,420 gigabytes, which is about the equivalent of 292 terabytes. So a 256 gig drive would have been written over many, many times. Anyway, lifetime estimation, total estimated lifespan 35 years or 70 years, and if you're trying to, so that was an average of 10 gigabytes a day on average, but double the amount of writes a day, 20 gigabytes, then you would half that lifespan. So, we're still talking quite a long time for a lifespan here. And lifespans have improved. So if we look at the newer. And for a slightly newer comparison, well, we've got the Samsung 960, the NVMe drive, that has a guaranteed lifespan of at least 800 terabytes, and the larger 2 terabyte is 1,200 terabytes or 1.2 petabytes. So even more than the older 840 Pro could do. So what we're talking about is quite a ridiculous lifespan. Even if you're writing flat out to the drive, you won't burn it out straight away. So that's a couple of points I could see doing damage to the system. Otherwise, you're sort of looking at some sort of like heat damage, like damaging the BIOS. Yes, but that would be heat, and you would have tripped a failsafe before it got to that point. So 5% bricked. How? How would you brick the device? Please elaborate, World Economic Forum. I can fully accept having to completely format and rebuild a system. Yes. The digital equivalent being in bed for a week. Okay, if my device down there got bricked, I would literally turn on the computer that I've got off the network, recover the backup image on it. It would be a case of about 20 minutes I would be out of action, and then I'd just carry on again. Like, I wouldn't be in bed for a week. My systems would be rebuilt bloody quickly. Maybe for a huge enterprise, it would be longer, but there would be some sort of start and process to getting it rebuilt. I'm sure at one point in these articles they did cite the issues that the shipping company Maersk had. And yes, it did take them a little while to rebuild, but they did operate without computers for a little while. And that is something they do mention here. So we got during the 2020 Australian bushfires, power outages and damage to mobile phone infrastructure gave citizens a newfound appreciation for battery-powered operated FM radios. But if cyber COVID ravaged a country, which radio stations would still operate without digital recording and transmission systems? Would states like Norway, would countries like Norway, which has completed its transition to digital radio, be able to roll back? And lesson 3, recovery from the widespread destruction of digital systems would be extremely challenging. So replacing 5% of the world's connected devices would require around 71 million new devices, which would be impossible for manufacturers to rapidly scale up production to meet demand, particularly if manufacturing and logistics systems were affected. Yeah, but as we kind of mentioned, the odds of actually trashing 5% of devices are going to be pretty bloody difficult. And how can we prepare for cyber COVID? So I've got a lot off at the what they're trying to call this. Anyway, I don't. None of what they're mentioning here is actually of any relevance. So, oh yeah, they did mention Maersk there. Not pettier cyber attack in 2017, which fair play to them, they did not pay the extortion, the ransomware. They actually recovered on their own. But realistically, it's about having some way of backing up. That is my opinion. I'm not going to discuss any of their opinions. It's about being able to recover from an attack. Yes, if you have to trash devices, I mean trashing them, but I have to like re-image them, then there should be some preparedness for that. Oh well, maybe it's food for thoughts for some enterprises, but do you know what, for the average home user, I'm going to sit here and do absolutely nothing. I'm not going to react to this or do anything different. I've even done a video on the subject. A global threat for a global response. Gotta say I dislike the video, but they're just trying to big up an issue out of nothing. Cyber attacks happen all the time. There's state actors, there's common criminal actors or criminal gangs. They'll still be around. There's cyber hygiene standards. Check you have a long, complex router password for your home Wi-Fi. Actually, I agree with you on that. Ensure you're not reusing passwords. Use a reliable VPN for internet access wherever possible. Why? Why do you need to use a VPN? Actually, I've argued that you don't. I'll link to that video in the description. But yeah, you don't need a VPN all the time. just keep your system updated. Don't reuse passwords and you're done. Well, that is a bit of an interesting thing here. Why are they talking about this more and more? People get bored of hearing the same alarmist things over and over again, and they just won't pay any attention when the time is actually right. And the time is not right. This is unnecessary, and your advice here is just really bad, and your sources are very dodgy, and they're to cause panic. Well, thanks for watching. I'll see you all later.